Does this house pay wages to housewives and husbands? Without further ado, I call upon Prime Minister to open the case within 7 minutes.
We think house chores are quite hard labor. To raise children and look after them all day, all night, to cook, to wash, all those sort of things, which is never-ending labor that you have to do all the time, you just can't stop. Which facilitates that proper and quality environment for families, and also for the working environment to come home and sleep safely, those sort of things, and enjoy the life of holidays. We think that is an important labor that deserves reward by the state. We think it's also problematic that there's a huge stigma or financial barrier on people who want to take that choice, that is the limit on people desiring to take a job as housewives or house husbands. We think the state's duty is to equalize access to any choice of vocation that people desire to take, and that's why we stand for this specific motion. What are we going to do? We're going to give money to people who are doing house husbands or housewives. So people who are married but are not taking a specific profession, not even part-time labor. These people are going to be given a certain wage by the state. We're not going to give specific amounts about that wage, but we think that we assume there will be the average income of that age that that individual is. We think that's quite natural, considering how there's a statistic proving that the value of the labor of house husbands or housewives is considered to be 10 million yen in like a Japanese context. We think that's quite fine or natural and shouldn't be denied by the opposition. I'm going to talk about three things. First, I'm going to talk about the current context, how society has been liberalized, but it's still stigmatizing people taking that choice to go into the house and enjoy their life. Second, I'm going to talk about why we're giving wage to these individuals, the most appropriate way to balance that burden or those sort of things. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about how our model works. Before that, yes.
Do you even pay for the young boy who really takes care of your brother?
Firstly, we think that if it's young, it might not be a profession, but we think, if it's principally consistent, we're happy to pay for the labor that he's doing after home. We don't think that's really an issue today. So, context. We think we're going to firstly talk about how women are being stigmatized. We think women, no thank you. In the liberalized norm, women have gone out of society. From past, women have achieved better position in society, in workplaces, those sort of things. But what it has led to is a stigma on people rather taking a choice to stay in that house. Things like more CEOs or women in job places, the book like Lean In, those sort of success, means that it's seemingly wrong to stay in the house, which will women as feminists simply as women feel stigma from surrounding girlfriend or those sort of individuals, that it's somewhat wrong to stay in the house while other people are going out in society and fighting. No, thank you. We also think that in the specific context of developed countries like Japan, it's expected that people will work together because of the economy is hard, those sort of things, which means that the choice to stay at home and contribute to your husband or maybe your wife is simply difficult. Why is that problematic? No, thank you. It's problematic because there are people that labor is something that deserves reward. It is something hard and it takes time and there is no rest to it. And on a feminist female right perspective, we think it's important to cherish anyone's choice that they want to take. So if a woman wants to take that choice to become a housewife, we think that choice is legitimate. And the state in the same way should respect that choice to become it. So when it's hard to take that choice, we think it's problematic. No, thank you. Also, on the men's perspective, there's still a norm that men are expected to get money for the household. So it's really something problematic seems problematic when men simply go to the house and do not simply create money. It's not necessarily when wife would necessarily feel forced at home. We also, that is firstly because of that overt expectation, but secondly because there are no role models for these male house husbands after home. The fact that there will be no friends that are taking the choice of house husband. It's only this person in that community and no one's doing it. And with the fact that he's special means that it's somewhat strange. It adds to the expectation to get money. That choice to become a house husband is severely limited or seems wrong when we think that it's legitimate for him to take that job. No, thank you. So why is, after all, wage a living way? We firstly already talked about how it is hard labor and it takes time, and someone contributes to the household in diverse ways. That in the same way how housemaids are paid for the labor that they do, how cleaners of hotels or anywhere are given the money for the labor that they do. We think that it's legitimate for a certain actor to pay wages for it. So if there cannot be a proper actor, the highest set technically isn't existent. We think that the state as an actor that gives reward that for the labor that they're doing. No, thank you. No, we also think that it's a state duty to equalize access to choices. For example, marital tax exemption is given because marrying is costly or is often difficult. Things like scholarship by the state is given because we want to equalize access to go to university, those sort of things. We think that the state duty to equalize access to choice, so when there's a stigma or financial bar to take a certain choice, we think that's when the state intervenes. And so as I've already talked about this problem, we think that is the moment where state should go in and help these people take that choice. No, thank you. We also think the unique point is that this problem is uniquely financial. Looking at men, the problem is that men is expected to pay. That means that men get money from that labor, that is house chore. We think that the stigma on them would necessarily diminish or vanish after all. We also think the fact that women being criticized for being housewives is after all the seemingly obedience to husbands, that they are financially totally dependent on their husband, those sort of things. That means that when wives are given money for the labor they do at house, they're not technically financially dependent on husbands at all. That they can make a living by themselves. They don't have to obey on husbands after all. What they buy, what they do, won't be the husband's money, but something that they made after all. So that's why we think giving wage and the money is technically the most appropriate way to balance that stigma and all those things I've already talked about. So how is that model going to work? We already obviously talked about how women and men won't have to feel that stigma and will be able to more smoothly go into that field of profession. We also think the fact that there will be more role models, especially for men. It means that there will be less stigma on them, because also friends would also be taking the choice of husbands who want to. That means that they won't be the special one, the strange one, that leads to stigma or conflict that they have to unnecessarily take. We also think the fact that men being able to stay at the household and raise children focusly or do these sort of things means that women who want to actively go out to society with a husband of that sort can do it in a more aggressive way. That means that self-actualization of these women will also be achieved, and that's why we stand for proposition.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for your speech. Next, I call for leader of opposition to open the case within 7 minutes hearing.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, opening opposition is going to keep it extremely simple. We think that this motion not only regresses the movement for female empowerment in the workplace, it also regresses the status of women and housewives at the home, and that's why we are very proud to stand on the opposition of today's debate. Before we move on to the arguments and the constructive material of today's round, let me firstly rebut back to what the Prime Minister talked about. Firstly, the Prime Minister told you that the main problem why housework is stigmatized in the current situation is precisely because we're not being paid. Men aren't being paid to go into the household, women aren't being paid to go into the household, and that's why they're stigmatized. Ladies and gentlemen, just because you pay prostitutes, it does not remove the stigmatization that is associated with prostitution. Just because you pay pornography actresses, it doesn't mean that you remove the stigma coming from them. Money has nothing to do with stigmatization of housework in the current situation, ladies and gentlemen. Rather, we tell you that the stigmatization of housework in the current situation comes from, the long tradition of the division of labor between the breadwinner and the houseworker, ladies and gentlemen. We think that the reason and the only way in which you can actually get rid of the stigma that is associated with this traditional form of labor is by the current status quo, where you encourage female empowerment to go into the workplace without paying for them, where you encourage mothers to go into the workload and make sure that these people have specific feminine needs like maternity leave and childcare leave and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. We think that making it easier for women to work is the only way forward to make sure that we destigmatize housework and also work at the workplace, and that's why we think that this is more beneficial. Secondly, they told you, no thank you, that they talk about how women and men both can achieve self-actualization by taking this proposal. Mr. Speaker, we tell you on our side of the House that their self-actualization assumes that the value of housework and the value of labor in the workplace will remain the same after you start paying them, and we don't think that's the case, and that brings me lightly to the point that we're going to talk about in opening up. Firstly, we're going to talk to you about how this proposal is actually regressive for female empowerment in the workplace. But before that, let's contextualize this debate, ladies and gentlemen. We're not talking about countries like Germany or France or the UK, where female empowerment has actually been achieved in the current paradigm, and there is no stigmatization for women in the workplace or in the household. We're talking about countries like Japan and Korea, where female empowerment in the workplace is just about to take place. And we're also trying to get rid of the stigma associated with housework as well as the workplace. But we think that in these kind of situations, ladies and gentlemen, the current status quo is enough to tackle the problem of female stigmatization and lack of female empowerment, ladies and gentlemen. Before that, yes.
So if the cause of the stigma is breadwinner and the opposite, how isn't that financial gap?
Here, here.
We think, ladies and gentlemen, that it's one thing to pay for one and not the other, and it's another thing to pay for both, because it degrades the quality of both, and it forces people back to the traditional forces of the division of labor, and that's what we're going to talk to you about if you stop interrupting with your pointless bits of information. Ladies and gentlemen, the status quo. We think on our side of the House that we already have female empowerment. When Christian Lagarde of the IMF told the Japanese population that Japan can still increase its GDP by 15 extra percentage points precisely by employing more women in the workplace. Or the current Abe administration, including 6 women in the cabinet office in order to encourage female empowerment in the cabinet shuffling that took place only 2 days ago, ladies and gentlemen. We think that these kind of movements in the upper levels of the government and also in the grassroots level, when we encourage mothers to take maternity leave, when we try and encourage women to enter the workplace through these organic forms of change, we think that we are getting the necessary impetus that is required in order to self-actualize, not only for women in the workplace, but also for women in the household as well. How does this proposal compromise that? In a couple of ways. Firstly, we think on our side of the House that allowing women, we think on our side of the House, it regresses the entire movement towards female self-actualization if you start paying for housework. Why is that? The reason why, ladies and gentlemen, the current paradigm is so successful is because women have little choice but to enter the workplace in the first place, ladies and gentlemen. It's precisely because we are not able to survive on a single person's income anymore in today's society that women are actually starting to work in the current situation. And that's why they are choosing the workplace. But after taking this proposal, ladies and gentlemen, and people start choosing housework, it becomes that much more attractive to these people, right? Especially for husbands who would rather have especially for husbands in countries like Japan and Korea, who would rather have these women stay in the workplace, stay in the household and cook or look after their children, as opposed to go and finding a job, opening up a new career, and so forth. We think that there's an inordinate amount of pressure, no thank you, in order to force women back into the household, ladies and gentlemen. To force women back into the household because there is now a credible alternative source of income by working in the household. We think that that actually regresses the entire movement towards the traction of attracting people towards getting women involved in the workplace, ladies and gentlemen. Now that this housework becomes a credible alternative, it means that there are more impetus, not only from the husbands who desire women to do their chores, but also from the women themselves who are more likely to choose housework as a result of indoctrination in the patriarchal society that we are often so familiar with in countries like Japan and Korea, ladies and gentlemen. We think that the current traction towards female empowerment in the workplace is going to be stigmatized by taking this proposal. It's going to regress, and that's why we want to oppose. Secondly, let's look at the idea of regressing the status of women in the home. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, we think that the reason why housework is valued in the home in the current situation as it is right now is precisely because it is free. The reason why, because it's free, people recognize that the housewives are taking their time and effort to make the sacrifices that are required to have a nice house, to clean the house, and so forth. The moment you start paying that, Mr. Speaker, you dilute the very value that housework predicates itself on, right? Because suddenly laundry has to become as good as the cleaner down the road, right? Suddenly cooking dinner has to be as good as that restaurant down the road. The moment you start paying for something, you start paying based on merit, you start paying for meritocratic outcomes as opposed to the charity itself. We think that that reduces the value of housework that is contributed by both housewives and house husbands. Because currently, right now, by taking this proposal, you are going to have people demanding higher standards, right, into the housework that they do. We think that that is actually counterproductive because housework becomes even more of a chore now. You don't not only have to do housework, you also have to be good at doing housework, ladies and gentlemen. Housework becomes that much more complicated, that much more burdensome on the people who are being paid to do housework, ladies and gentlemen. And that's the reason why we would rather keep housework unpaid. We would have women in the workplace, both in the home and in the household. And that's why we oppose.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. Next, I call upon Deputy Prime Minister again.
It's been a while for me to debate, but I'm quite excited at this moment because I'm proud to provide two key extensions from DPN. First, I would explain how this policy would ignore remove the stigma within house. Ladies and gentlemen. And secondly, I will talk about how this policy will lead to a better house, better family plan, and we think that's important because marriage and the organization of family stands for continuity, and we think a stable family is extremely important in today's day and age. But before we go to those substantive, I'm going to revert to Mr. Kowa. So he argued, look, firstly, stigma do not do with money. But I think there is a contradiction within his argumentation. What do you mean by this? First and foremost, he argued stigma do not do with money. But at the same time, as Chikara had pointed out in his point information, that the origin of stigma, according to Kowa, is according to the relationship between breadwinner and his subordinate. It necessarily implies that stigma is created through financial gap. Ladies and gentlemen, we think that stigma is going to be reduced by empowering the people who are staying at home by our policy, and we think that stigma can be solved according to his logic, and we think there's nothing contentious in his argumentation. So, secondly, Kowa argued that this policy reduces the kind of progress that we have to face if it's presented in Japan, Korea, so on and so forth. I'm going to be very, very nice that I'm going to accept the contextualization to make this debate clean. But, Mr. Speaker, we don't think this policy would reduce the kind of progression in which we can face in today's debate. Why is that? We think because the first response I have is that this policy, the kind of policy in which Kowa is going to support by introducing the example of Abe, is the kind of policy which Abe is trying to implement in the status quo only privileges the people who wants to liberate or the people who wants to engage in society, not back in home. However, our policy is not mutually exclusive in the first place, but secondly, we think that in order to liberalize, or if we we recognize or understand the concept of liberalization by the virtue of expanding female individual choices, we think our policy would be more empowered because it makes the choice of housewives more lucrative and also the liberating society more lucrative. And we think those kind of the benefit in which COA wants to stand is not going to be severely damaged on our side of the house. And and also COA and secondly he told us working as a this policy would force women to go to housework, and we don't think that is not the case, because it is not a force, ladies and gentlemen, by offering a variety of choices, ladies and gentlemen. We don't abandon we female to be liberated because according to their contextualization, that pathway is open right now. But secondly, as I told you in my responses, that people who want to opt in to family housewife can legitimately and proudly opt in to that kind of pathway, and we don't think that's not a force to begin with. No, thank you. Furthermore, I put to you that people, before marriage, oftentimes people would work, and they would have a constant discussion on whether or not people would still continue to work after marriage or to become a housewife before marriage. And I'm going to extend that way on that level in my second extension. So, finally, most crucial thing is that, ladies and gentlemen, that he had missed that our policy also financially incentivizes men to go into households. Ladies and gentlemen, if men are all going to be housewives or husbands, for example, necessarily, ladies and gentlemen, female is going to work, and therefore the kind of benefit in which COA wants to stand is going to be protected on our side of the house. Last response. No, thank you. I'm sorry. This policy degrades the value of household because the kind of expectation is high to make clean the house clean, so on and so forth. I don't think people housewife, average reasonable person has to be professional, ladies and gentlemen. The kind of because we think if the family member is satisfied with that kind of cleaning, cook, so on and so forth, it is people get a high amount of salary. And also, we put to you, the people can be proud of being a household or house husband or housewife, because that reward by the state necessarily empower the kind of the satisfaction of themselves as being a housewife and house husband. And we think that is not a degradation of value of housewives to begin with. Forming the extension, yes, sir.
Okay, so how is it empowering women? If this woman does a lot of work and puts a lot of effort into her chores and laundry, but she only gets paid what she considers to be a very small amount for her work, how is that empowering? How does that increase the quality of dignity of the housework itself?
In the same way that average reasonable worker can complain to government, I think under our policy, people, our husband or housewives or house husband can complain to the state that the amount of salary I gain is relatively low, and we think it's proportionate according to Chikara's contextuality and the modeling. We think that's not necessarily a problem. So extension. So I would extend the debate on how this policy would remove the kind of stigma within family. We think, ladies and gentlemen, what money makes us special in this debate is the money offers a power in negotiation within house. No, thank you. What do we really mean by this? The kind of patriarchy we want to identify and the problem rectify the outrageous injustices, as we understand, is the fact that the kind of rhetoric in which COA had agreed upon that men saying I'm a breadwinner and degradation of women on the basis of financial capability, ladies and gentlemen. But what makes money special in this debate is that we the kind of power imbalance in terms of financial might, ladies and gentlemen, and we think that's immensely beneficial because the precise problem is we as female want to identify and break the problem is the degradation or the kind of the female value, and we think if a female is going to be proud of themselves by countering that kind of patriarchal rhetoric, and we think that's an immense benefit in that instances. But secondly, the extension is going to be about how this policy would lead to make a better family plan. To be honest, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pretty good at cooking. I'm pretty good at cleaning. What makes policy special is that the person who, like me, is going to be entering that house husband, and my girlfriend in my future to become occurring in society. And what makes different, special in this debate is that we as a couple can constantly become stable because there is no concern in financial deficit. And our marriage life is going to flourish comparatively than the status quo. We can earn a lot of money and sustain our family for the sake of that female, for the sake of family, for the sake of men. And overall, we're proud to propose a motion.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for your speech. Now I call upon Deputy Leader of the Opposition to get here.
It's a bit weird that explanation coming from the Deputy Prime Minister because they once conceded the fact that there's a society is already patriarchic, there's enough social pressure for women to go into the house and to be the housewives. But actually, he said it's kind of free choice of the individuals, and if they want to go into the house, yeah, they can do that. Or if they want to go out of the society, or go into the society, they can do that. So those kind of analysis is mutually incompatible in the first place. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, on the level of the basis of the argumentation, the opening government is already crumbled in the first place. So as the deputy leader of opposition, I can examine basically two things. And firstly, I examine the issues of the liberation of women, which is one of the paramount clashes that are happening between opening half and the why opposition is superior to give the liberation to the women on the ground by actually really letting them to go out of the society and change the historical and traditional perception of the breadwinner and actually the people who are obedient to them. And secondly, I'm going to further examine the issue of the paying itself, and regardless of the gender or regardless of the context, and why actually it's absolutely bad to stay the one or the member of the family and to make them confined into the certain rooms because of the social nature of the human beings. Before that, two pieces of rebuttal to the opening government. Ladies and gentlemen, the opening government don't understand the Marxism enough because they just say that the relationship between breadwinner or the obedience is the only issue of the money. But ladies and gentlemen, the leader of opposition already gave you the answer. Not only the amount you earn, no thank you, but also the how to earn is also an important factor to decide whether you're the breadwinner or the people who are obedient in the first place. That's why the COA already responded to them by saying that the prostitution is still already stigmatized, even though they earn a lot. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, basically the man is prestigious because they go out to society and earn, and by confining the women in the private sphere. So although they work and earn a lot within the private sphere, those kind of the traditional and historical conception of the work never changes. You study Marxism more and more. And secondly, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of the ability-based assessment, that's the model coming for the opening government. But ladies and gentlemen, we need to recognize and who to assess those kind of the work done by the wives in the first place. It's systematically impossible for the government to go into every single house and say how they are good or how they are bad in the first place. So the husband and who has the power has to be the judge or the decision maker to give the assessment to the wives in the first place to make their case happen in the first place. So those kind of the model is fundamentally worse and for the women to liberate themselves because those kind of the husband will be in a prestigious position to judge and assess how actually their wives are good or bad in terms of the houseworking in the first place. So the model coming from the opening government will further exacerbate the hierarchy between the husband and wives in the first place. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, their policy is completely counterproductive in terms of the liberation of the women in the first place. And having kicking out from the opening government. So, the issues. First of all, the issue of the liberations. Ladies and gentlemen, the fundamental assumption of the opening government is this: that if you're financially capable and you can do whatever they want, that we call self-actualization. Not at all in the first place. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, even the fucking rich husband, fucking rich mother, and in the wealthy family, and still have the difficulty in how actually actualizing herself, even though she gives or that she has a so huge budget and coming from his own husband, and she can do whatever she wants. So, ladies and gentlemen, we need to recognize those kind of the financial capability is not all about in the first place. And actually, actually those kind of liberation only happens when the men and women are truly equal in terms of the social life and as well as a private life in the first place. And because, ladies and gentlemen, the current paradigm strongly encourages the women to go out to society and go out to the society and earn, and we are now recognizing the fact that those kind of historical division between men and women are gradually being dissolved. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, leader of our opposition already told you the emergence of the norm of equal men, that because we recognize the housework is something different from those kind of the jobs or the way to earn, and because we recognize housework is something tiring, and there's a there's a concept, and whether men and women and has to share those kind of the burdensome jobs in the private sphere, and since women are gradually going out of society and getting socially active in the first place. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, because it's unpaid, because it's something private, because it's something burdensome, and there's a those kind of newly emerging norms now existing in the society, and that is the logic, and to truly liberate women from the historical binding between the private and public in the first place. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, there's an absolute necessity not to introduce this proposal and still let housework unpaid, to actually to make women socially active and more giving the choice whether to go out of the society and actually stay in the home in the first place. That's a true liberation we are talking about. So in terms of that, ladies and gentlemen, given that context, and we've already got the consensus in this debate, there's already existing pressure against women to go into the home, and this policy is nothing but the exacerbation of those existence norms, which is completely counterproductive to to the liberation of the women in the first place. I'm sorry, you are too late. So in terms of the liberation, the opposition clearly takes this clash in the first place. And secondly, about the issue of the segregations. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't think the segregation is not absolutely good stuff for the men or even for women. Precisely because, ladies and gentlemen, as long as we are a social being and we need some different places, you can have enough personality. You can have the different personality or the different faces with the relationship between other guys. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, although the women are financially capable, they always have a grievance because they don't have enough social life in the first place. But this policy, ladies and gentlemen, because it's according to the model of the proposition, and because it's well paid, and because it's efficient, and to deal with those kind of the tiring job, because if you be a senior chauffeur, for example, you're going to be paid by the government, or with the assessment of the father, and it necessarily creates a mechanism to confine one of the partner into the private sphere and deprive their social lives regardless of the gender, or regardless of the situation, or regardless of the context. So that's why, ladies and gentlemen, we think it's completely okay for those who want to stay in and being the housewife or the husband, but this policy necessarily creates a coercion for either part of the family to stay in the family, and those kind of the social life of those kind of person is deprived. For all those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, there's no way for the proposition.
Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition. Moving on to closing part, Honorable Member.
Ladies and gentlemen, the boys may talk about feminism, what it feels like to be a woman in this society. Pressure to constantly make choices that perhaps are not your own. Constantly not recognized for the choices that you make as a private individual. We tell you that the opening house simply fails on all levels of recognizing what the status quo actually is. But furthermore, how this particular policy is not necessarily only about the empowerment of women in general, but rather dealing with the particular situation when you have a minority population that's been deprived of their economic rights, a minority population that is devalued by society. How does the state come along to compensate those particular depreciations and devaluations? This debate, ultimately, if it leads to empowerment of women, good for them. But ultimately, it's really not about a grander scheme, but about a situation where minorities are deprived in the status quo. What strategy must be taken by the government? The unique contribution that the closing government is going to bring to you is basically that when women choose, whether voluntarily or whether in a situation of coercion, choose to stay within their boundaries of their homes, doing laundry, cooking, and whatnot, How is it not recognized as a labor that they provide for the family, but furthermore to the society as child rearers, as agents of the government that is responsible for childcare and housework and family planning overall? But furthermore, we want to talk about how the government has an inherent duty to maximize utility of individuals. That at the end of the day, if I am not able to pursue my happiness because of a social construct, or because of a stigma, or because of some other values that society puts on my shoulders, not recognizing my independent choice, how is it fair, and therefore why should the government step in? Before that, let's deal with what Tomoya said. Now, they have this strange parallel example that somehow, prostitution is a legit case in this particular debate, because guess what, guys? Prostitution is not even valued despite the money. Fact of the matter is, you simply cannot compare the two occupations, so to say, because prostitution is not looked down upon because it pays less or it pays a lot. It's because it's the selling of your own body and selling of sex, something that a lot of people religiously and spiritually consider as to be private, as to be saint, as to be, have sanctity. Fact of the matter is, when it comes to housewives, despite the fact that a lot of the activities that they do are recognized legitimately by the government as legitimate labor, nonetheless are not given these rights nor this protection as an economic right. We tell you there's a fundamental difference in you saying that prostitutions or prostitutes aren't getting valued, because that's really not the concern. The concern is when your labor and what you do is recognized when other people do it, how is it fair for the society to not recognize you and your choice alone? But furthermore, this idea of liberation of women, because they seem to assume that's horrible when the government encourages women or men to stay at home. We tell you, shame on you to delegitimize a choice that an individual will make to stay at home, take care of the child, and do cooking and laundry. If that's how you self-actualize, and if that's how you pursue happiness, we tell you the government is not going to stand in your way and say, join Abe and his wonderful cabinet members, but rather recognize you as a happy individual pursuing your own lifestyle. So no, thank you. But furthermore, this idea that they're coerced. Mr. Speaker, they're the ones who evaluated this debate to be about Japan and Korea. I'm very sure we don't live in the Meiji dynasty or the Joseon dynasty where women don't have freedoms and women don't have brains. They probably did, but Anyways, but the point is we live in a modern world where women are included and women are opting into different options. Simply put, housework is one of the channels that these women decide to devote their lives on. So who are you to say that it's a horrible world when women decide not to go into society but stay at home? Because we tell you that's a legitimate choice, and if you're a feminist, that's what you need to support. Yes, sir.
I mean, okay, that would be true if it was a free choice. What you totally disregarded is the idea that the patriarchy has existed, which is something that the OG has also conceded, and you're maybe ignoring the fact that this is actually not a free choice given by the individual due to the coercion of tradition, due to the coercion of the patriarchy.
First of all, if it's a coercion that these women decide to stay, how is depriving them of their economics further enhancing their status? If your problem is that these women are deprived and therefore they have no legitimate choice, how is it not compensating them for whichever situation that they're in? Because even refugees get paid compensation, ladies and gentlemen. We tell you that if it's such a coerced choice that you're kidnapped into an isolated apartment and forced to cook and launder, we tell you even more the reason to economically empower them. But furthermore, we're not denying the patriarchal mechanism, and that's what we're going to deal with, how wage will empower them in my extension. First of all, no, it's ma'am, so stop. First of all, agents of the government. They already failed, they're not even Okay, so first of all, agents of the government. Why is it legitimate for the government to pay wages? No, thank you. Because the government is responsible for the collective population of the country. However, they're not able to give you a bottle every time you cry when you're a 12-year-old, when you're 12 months, not 12-year-old, 12 months old. They're not able to change your uniform and launder and help you eat breakfast so that you can study well at school. Governments trust house husbands and housewives and delegate that responsibility for child rearing and for housekeeping, so that individuals who work in corporations can have a decent meal at the day, that housekeeping can be done, that nobody lives in a house with spider webs. We tell you that when the government is giving you this responsibility and burden to take care of certain household chores and child rearing, we tell you that it is only fair that they compensate. But the bigger question, ladies and gentlemen, then is, how does wages lead to a certain empowerment or a certain recognition of these individuals? We tell you that when you put a monetary value on a particular activity, no thank you, on a particular, no more from you, a particular activity or a particular action that's condoned by the government, it's only equalized when this person is compensated for the hard work that they put in. They try to have you believe that somehow being free mothers or why we value our fathers. That's simply not true. The fact that they do it for you, despite the fact that sometimes you probably drive them crazy, is just a testimony of their love, does not mean that their labor can be paid with your Mother's Day cards and your mugs that you ugly mugs that you draw on, in kindergarten. We tell you that economic compensation is the only way that these women or these men are able to empower themselves. Self-realization, ladies and gentlemen, we're not talking about these women wanting jets to fly all over the world. But when we're telling you, when there's a power dynamic of the breadwinner, something that they really fail to engage on side of the opposition, when there is a particular breadwinner in charge of the bills, in charge of the major economic decisions of the household, whether you want to move to Kyoto for a cheaper house, or whether you want to move to the America to study further, we tell you that ultimately it's decided, and sadly, by the person with the fatter wallet. We tell you because they're the ones who are going to move around their accounts and find means to make important choices. Women who are housewives will ultimately be isolated. They will not be able to learn yoga if they want to. They will not be able to travel with their friends if they want to. Simply put, because the government does not recognize their economic rights. Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, this is not some haphazard feminism debate. This is about a minority that's deprived and devalued by the society. How better do we compensate them but to respect and restore their economic rights? For those reasons, we're very proud to propose this.
Thank you, member of government. Next, I call upon member of opposition. Yeah.
Before my extension, I'll give you some engagement, including the clarification of the context of this debate. The first context coming from the opening government is patriarchal society, where the women are forced to work at home and husbands are working outside. And it's that women become happy by paying the wages to them. It's one of the benefits coming from the opening government. And the second context coming from the opening government is a society where both wives and husband are working husband because it's necessary for the money, economic incentive. Also, we think it is a core, maybe it is a core context of this phase. So first, about the first context, we think they cannot solve the problem at all. First battle in this context is this proposal will rather intervention on to pressure women to stay at home, as the opening option already told you, because now they have the rhetoric, you receive the money, there is no necessity to go out for you. We think that that rhetoric is uniquely harmful in that kind of society. Secondly, their assumption is after you receive the money from the government, you can use the money and actualize themselves very well. We think it is not true in the case. I will give you the why, even after you receive the money, how the women cannot actualize themselves. I will give you the details in my extension. A second context coming from the opening government is that both two actors are working outside. We think this policy may incentivize either of them to start housekeeping, but we don't think it's necessary for government to support that. We think it's one of the choices for both sides, the wives and husband, to work outside, and we can appreciate it. We think this proposal will rather hinder the choices for both wives and husband to work outside is problematic. So moving my extension. Firstly, I will give you when the government provide money to the work, because this is the motion to say about why the government can have the duty to provide the wages to the husband. It's not touched by the opening half ever. And secondly, I will tell you, even after the women or the male housewives, husbands have the money from the government, we think this policy will rather limit the choice of them. We think is counterproductive. So firstly, about when government have to provide money to the work. Government provide wages only when that work is fundamentally necessary to sustain a society. Case study here. Firstly, we think we pay for the government officer. Without government officers, we cannot run the state. That's why we think it is essential to financially incentivize people to engage in that. We think it is necessary for the government to pay for that. And secondly, basically we pay for the marital status because unless people get married and unless people make children, society cannot be sustainable. We think that's why the government have to provide the necessary money for them to financially incentivize those people to obtain that kind of working. That's why I think, but however, come to a case study here. We don't pay for the volunteer works, for example, cleaning the road of the city or cleaning the Mount Fuji or so forth. Even though it's also the hard work, but we don't pay for that. Precisely because it's not fundamentally essential. We don't want to degrade the volunteer work because it's very socially desirable and it benefits many people, but we have to confirm here, if we say the reward for that shouldn't be paid in a way to pay the wage for them, because it's not fundamentally necessary. Even without cleaning the road, even without cleaning the Mount Fuji, we can sustain our life, our society. Listen, that's why we think we don't pay the money in this case. They're talking about, especially Croatian government talking about the paying for wages is a compensation for the responsibility that housewives or house husbands are fulfilling. But we think to raise up children, you can send your children to the nursery school or you can hire housekeepers by yourself. We don't think it's fundamentally necessary for them to work inside at home. We think it's not the fundamental necessity for them to work for that. That's why we think uniquely in this case, we don't have to pay the wages for them because it's not necessary at all. So secondly, Farah, yes.
Sir, Japan will still be a great country without Mount Fuji. Japan will fail without Japanese mothers supporting their husbands and children to make sure that they get educated and grow into mature adults to sustain their economy.
We don't think it's benefit your country to some extent, but the unique difference between the volunteer works and other kind of monetary benefit is a fundamental necessity of them. We think we can sustain our life without cleaning the Mount Fuji, without cleaning the road of the city. It's a unique difference, but we don't think that it's the unique fundamental necessity to pay wages for the housekeeping. So secondly, even after women have money, that they cannot be liberalized. The characterization of opening government is women are forced to work night and day and every night. It is crucial. We don't think there is no compensation for that and it's problematic. We think that characterization is completely false. Uniquely because we maintain the housekeeping as volunteer work, we can make an atmosphere when wives became housekeepers, husbands also have to help wives because it's volunteer work. For example, we see many Japanese people now start to be more cooperative in raising up children because it's not the duty or responsibility for wives, it's only the volunteer work for them. That makes a unique incentive for the house husbands who work outside to help the volunteer of the wives. Mr. Speaker, we think that although husbands work outside every day in weekdays, they help the wives, for example, in Saturday or Sunday. We think that is uniquely created by the current paradigm. What their policy is doing is this. They give the husband who work outside to the rhetoric to say, it's your job for the wives, I will go outside also in Sunday, because it's the job of the wife to do the housekeeping your house. Because they receive the money from the government, you already have enough compensation from the government and wages for the government. That will create the unique incentive for the husbands not to help their wives or so forth. That's why we think even after they take the money, women have the money by the government, they cannot actualize themselves. Because even you have the money, you don't have any time to use the money and utilize them to educate themselves. Because you have to just stay home, even in the weekends, Saturday and Sunday, you have no time to actualize themselves. That's uniquely harmful because they show that even though there is the proportionate money, there is no way and no room for them to utilize that. It doesn't help you to be liberalized by the patriarchal norm or the other norms that is problematic. We think their policy is only counterproductive to help the women and male who are working for the house. We're very productive, of course.
Thank you, Member of Opposition. Next, I call upon Government Rep.
whether housewives works or husbands works in the house actually deserves the government compensation or wages. Concerning my partner's argument about our government actually outsourcing its own job in order to sustain the whole society, whether it is, as the previous speaker has mentioned, really something that is not fundamentally necessary for the country. And secondly, I'm going to look at what kind of practical consequence this motion is about to bring after making this proposal, and how it will change the whole society's recognition about houseworks, and how it will actually make this very important job a valued choice. Firstly, about these, whether it deserves the governmental compensation. So the previous speaker has mentioned that government only provides it when it's fundamentally necessary, like policing or so forth. And they mentioned this example of Mount Fuji. Well, as my partner has pointed out, Mount Fuji, it's totally different in the first place, right? But before that, taking the example of Mount Fuji, the state already organizes a cleaning team, task team. So because after Mount Fuji was recognized as a World Heritage, it sees these kind of jobs already as something to pay for. So it was a strange example coming from the opposition side. However, even if that was true, that we don't pay those volunteer workers, it's fundamentally different from those houseworks. So what is actually happening in house is that those, as is already contextualized in this debate, those housewives or house husbands have to work 24/7 as a housework and take care of every single thing that those people who are working outside do not have essentially need, right? In order for society to actually function as generating a profit or money so that services so that society can sustain, they need a house that they can at least rely on and relax on, right? We believe that when people do not, no one takes care of the houses and their homes are there's no food waiting for them and there's no hot baths waiting for them. What happens then is that society actually will have much more great stress inside, and therefore we don't think that it can be compared to volunteer work. It's fundamentally offensive when they compared it to prostitution works or those porn stars and so forth. I think it was a mistake. Before that, yes, opening.
Okay, so your paradigm just respecting the choice of women to be a housewife by paying it. Our paradigm, they respect every single choice of women in a holistic level by actually breaking down the social dichotomy between private and public. Where is a particular reason to over-prioritize women who to be a housewife in the first place?
Well, we don't think it's an over-prioritization. My partner has clearly pointed out that under the status quo, there are many instances in which those people who are basically women choosing to be housewives are not actually choosing to be housewives, but rather being coerced to do that job. And what my partner has brought to you is that, no, thank you. The state is actually, the state does not have the capability to take care of the houses, right? How are they, they can never do it without the help of those housewives or house husbands doing that job. We believe it's morally abhorrent when the government just ignores this kind of situations when those individuals literally sacrificing their own life for their own husbands or for their children, and just saying that women have to go out to work, they should go out to work so that they can actually liberalize and so forth. We don't think this debate is actually about how to liberalize those individuals, but however, when we actually look at the very individual minority people who are suffering without any governmental help, we think this motion is to stand. No, thank you. Right. Secondly, what is actually going to happen? So what my partner has brought to you is that because we are not actually paying this kind of job, those individuals do not have enough capability to achieve self-actualization. For example, going to yoga or playing with their friends. Government opposition bench tried to say that they will rather after taking this proposal be coerced into doing without having a social life. We think that's the status quo, right? What's happening right now is that those individuals with no income have to ask for their own husbands to do what they really like doing sports or having fun with their friends. After taking this proposal, what's going to happen is that they will actually have a pride or like evidence that their work, this money that they have, is something that they have earned themselves, not something that they have like borrowed or borrowed from their own husbands. We think this kind of perception fundamentally changes this power structure between the husband and the wife. And moreover, like we can add another actor to this when thinking about children, right? What happens after taking this proposal is that those children will look at their mothers working, and they won't understand at school. They see it as a free volunteer work, as the opposition side is trying to say. And what happens then is that when they grow up, they will still witness this, see this as a volunteer work, which will actually make them see after they marry, like recognize it as a volunteer work and does not need to have any wages given. After taking this proposal, because we pay, the government officially recognizes it as something that is having deserving pay. What happens is that those next generation can actually see it as a much more valuable work, which makes them much more like respect what those house husbands or housewives do. The previous speaker tried to say that after taking this proposal, those husbands are unlikely to help their wives because like they think it's paid, but we think it's the contrary, right? Right now, like there are not, of course, there are some men who are trying to help their women. However, most women think it's not enough, right? They stay at home 24/7, work all the time, and their husbands only helps them on the weekends and like just plays with their own kids, so forth. We don't think this is enough, right? After taking this proposal, because much more people in society will start to value what their husbands or housewives are doing, we believe they have much more incentive to help their own people who are working at home and help them with the chore. We don't think this is a mutually exclusive one from the opposition bench. So therefore, when we try to tackle this power imbalance within the family, we think this motion should stand.
Thank you, Government Whip. Last three and one close opposition whip.
Because I'm planning to give you the lecture on web tomorrow, so please listen to me carefully. What's the law with web speech? Web speech has to show, firstly, why we are superior to opening heart, secondly, why we are superior to the opposite side. One thing which opposite side is misunderstanding of our extension is especially first part. My partner will try to analyze the situation where those works, like houseworks, are valued as a fundamental thing, which state assumes as one type of job. We don't think this is one type of job, because even though you are not housewife or house husband who has to stay at home whole day, you can feed your children, you can raise yourself up, and that's fine, we think. We think it's unfair. Only people who choose to stay at home as whole day can gain money, because we're using tax money. Even though it's necessary for us to pay money, even if it's necessary for us to do such kind of thing, to raise your children up, it doesn't mean state has to pay wages for these people, only because you are feeding your children only once a time in, for example, in the morning or just night. When we're talking about a situation where a wife or husband has to stay at home whole day, and why we have to have the differences here, it's unfair. That's the first extension nuance which is totally neglected by the side of the house. So, I will talk about two things in my speech. First, whether the state has an obligation to pay wages to the housewife or house husbands who stay at home all day or not. Secondly, which is better for the equalization of the women and men, which all sides are talking about in this debate. So, first case, whether the state has to pay, has an obligation to pay wages to those people. Oji talked about they deserve that money. Why? Because it is hard work, and also it contributes to equalization. First of all, they haven't shown any reason why it's only because hard we have to pay for them. Of course, sports players, everyone is trying so hard to gain something, but it doesn't mean state has to pay for it. They have no reason. That's why Oji has to fairly explain in terms of principle. But second part, equalization, they have to show practically why they can achieve that equalization. If they couldn't do that, they have to fail, no thank you, don't burden through. Then they have to fail this debate. Then closing government talk about state
has an obligation to pay for the effort which tries to support the collective utility in our own society, because government has a trust for that kind of stuff. Then question comes here. State has to pay for everything. Not. Of course, we have to think about that money comes from tax, which is collective of every individual. And if that money is unfairly given to a certain number of people, we mustn't do that. It's rather unfair, and we think that must be escaped in the first place. Then they talked about we have to pay compensations, especially in the context of patriarchal society where people are limited on choices. This debate is not about compensation. This debate is about pay wages. Then the immigration or those kind of stuff, which is out of this debate in the first place. We don't talk about that kind of stuff. Then, what closing your position told you? We specifically analyze when states pay money or pay wages towards certain type of people. We only pay wages, no thank you, to people when it is fair for everyone, when it is absolutely necessary for everyone, as a worker, as a name of worker, as a job. We don't think this is necessary as a job. You only have to pay, you only have to feed yourself, but you won't get any result, no thank you, any money from the state, any wages from the state, even though you feed yourself. We think it's totally strange or totally unfair. Only people who choose to stay at home all day can get money. We rather think it's like the same as volunteer work, just work which you choose to. We don't think that cannot be the reason that you can get money in the first place. So before moving to second case,
If you oppose this motion on the basis of individuals staying at home, why breathing our air outside is a prerequisite for individuals to earn money?
Sorry, I can please.
If you oppose the motion by saying it is unfair because individuals stay at home, then why breathing air outside is going to be a prerequisite for individuals to earn money?
We think you can earn money, for example, by staying at home or working yourself, but it doesn't have to be like that kind of stuff, because we think it's unfair, as we told you again and again. Paying money through taxation means you have to be fair for everyone. Only person who stays at home and only person who stays at home can gain money, and the other person who just feeds your children, feeds yourself, and goes out cannot gain money is totally unfair, because this motion talks about not only feeding yourself, but talks about the situation where only housewives or house husbands would gain money for the same job, for the same stuff. So let's move to second case, which is better for achieving the equalization. OG talked about female and male can freely choose their housework because they get paid. So the question comes here. Those people choose to not choosing to stay at home only because of money. Of course not. They have their own passions. They have their own dreams. The reason is lots of stuff. Then we couldn't hear any specific reason, any specific explanation why only giving money can be the reason for these people to stay at home. It is dubious. We cannot do that at all. Then OG and CG somehow touched the idea that it's better for female because or male, mainly female, who are oppressed, because they can gain money, they can utilize that money to liberate themselves. Question again comes here. Can you really use that money as you like? All most cases, salary comes into your family, you have to pay for not only yourself, or in most cases, you get to utilize that money in the full autonomy. Then you have to pay for your children, you have to pay for house foods, all this kind of stuff have to be considered. Then we can see any specific explanation, any specific extra benefits which female can gain through this policy. Then the arguments falls in the first place. What we told you from closing the position, all mainly talked about it can force patriarchal or not, but we specifically analyze what happens inside the family if this policy is taken. Under the status quo, people who want to go out can go out. People who want to stay at home can stay at home. And husband, even in the patriarchal society or some society, husband has the incentive to care about your wife in, for example, weekends. Because your wife is working at home all days without any payment, without any reward. Then husband has the incentive to care about that housewife. Then what happens if we take this policy? After taking this policy, husbands can gain the rhetoric to oppress certain type of jobs toward these females. Even though the females can gain money at their context, they cannot utilize that money because they don't have time to use it, because husband wants that female to stay at home, do their jobs even in the Saturdays, Sundays, because it is their jobs, they get reservation. So, for these reasons, we are proud to oppose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. Now speech is over. Thank you for your nice debate.
モデルディベートを行ってくださった皆様、本当にありがとうございました。もう一度大きな拍手をお願いします。